Born to a raccoon mother and a skunk father, Jumbo's life was grave as he lived in an unforgiving world. His parents would be out scavenging the forests and neighborhoods for anything to eat, leaving him in the den to evade predators and sleep and wait. While his father was great at supplying food, his mother was quick with her scavenging so that she could return to the den to care for her baby. Although his father would be out a lot for food, when he was home, his gentle demeanor would be something he'd remember, of what his young brain could. His mother was protective of him in a way that any mother would be, unflinchingly devoted and stubborn in her affection and protection. Besides having to hide from the many predators, there was nothing more he wanted in his life. His mother and father loved and cared for him. That was all he needed in these few years. One night, his mother had him come back to the den at the time she would, just before sundown. The young Jumbo had been used to being alone, but his mother was punctual, and he had gotten used to this ritual so that it would feel like clockwork. He didn't realize that he desired this ritual until later, and he began to panic. An hour went by, and another, and Jumbo's panic would only grow. Finally, his mother would burst into the den with a cut on her back that was bleeding, grabbing him by the scruff and taking him out as quickly as she could. His father was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing but confusion and terror going through the young SKUNKOON's mind as the outside world that he once knew, a stretch of branches above and the river past his den, was now transformed and expanding into an overwhelming world of darkness. Roots, stumps, and towering trees were a blur against the pink sky that was constantly blackening. Jumbo didn't know that raccoons would usually abandon their nest and take their young if they sensed predators that would jeopardize their safety. This was different. It wasn't a threat that could be predicted easily. He heard barking behind him. It wasn't the barking he was used to, what he would hear in the distance as he waited for his parents. This was a much more ferocious barking. It didn't even sound like a dog. As his mother continued to run, Jumbo scruffed on her teeth. Jumbo looked back and saw the dog chasing after him. The only thing he remembered was the feral look in its eyes, something white coming from its teeth. It was the first time he had seen the face of anyone else besides his mother and father. Jumbo couldn't even squeal. His mother ran and ran until she came to a summit. She set Jumbo on the ground. As a young one does, he could sense the emotion in his mother's voice.
I'm sorry, sweetheart, but we'll meet again. I promise.
With her snout, she pushed Jumbo down the summit. He rolled and rolled. He was knocked out before he hit the bottom. He didn't know that his mother watched through her tears as she had to separate from her baby. He didn't know that he landed on a rock and had a gash in his shoulder. He didn't know when he would see his mother. But he would never see his father again. To a fear he never realized he had, he was in a new life. A life with his aunt. A life more domestic, challenging. Jumbo's aunt, his mother's sister, had a calmer life in the domestic world compared to the wildlife of the forest. Although his mother wanted to be with the man she loved, his aunt was more than happy to bring them in. His mother didn't think that they'd be accepted into their lifestyle. They were a raccoon and a skunk who lived in the wilderness with a hybrid child. How could they have known if they were to be accepted if viewed as scavengers, someone who had to fend off others to survive, which they inherently were? Jumbo would awake in a bedroom. He and his shoulder were bandaged up. This was a new location, and he wasn't familiar with it. This sudden, drastic change was terrifying to him. He didn't know what to do. He didn't have the stretch of branches above him, or the river just outside. He had a ceiling above, and a bathroom across from him. He didn't have his mother. He would never have his father. All he could do was cower in fear, shivering, even underneath the warm blankets, and wincing from the pain in his body. He didn't realize that this would be instinct, but he knew one thing. He was alone, and scared. The door to the bedroom opened. The sound alone made him cower more. Slowly, a raccoon stepped in with a plate of food. It wasn't his mother, but there was something familiar about her to him. This was, of course, his aunt. The panic he was feeling, however, wouldn't subside. The only thing he could do was breathe heavily as he wouldn't break eye contact with her. He could tell that she sensed it. She was careful with her movements. She felt just as inviting as his mother, but she wasn't his mother, which troubled him. She set the plate of food in front of him, carefully backing away. All Jumbo could do was look from the plate to her and back again. In a gentle tone, his aunt said, "You can eat. I'll be right outside." She shifted her weight slowly to the door, walked out, and closed it softly. He was alone again. His panic was still pronounced, but it was subsiding. The plate of food had berries, a slab of meat, and creamed corn. Jumbo would look from the door to the plate. After a while, he leaned forward, still wincing from the pain, and began eating. The berries were all right. The meat wasn't bad, but it was the creamed corn that he especially liked, and it was the one thing he ate entirely. He lay back down, feeling the soft surfaces of the mattress and pillow underneath him. It was a brief moment of comfort, but it was enough for Jumbo to fall asleep. This routine of his aunt coming in to feed him was enough for Jumbo's ritual to become reset, as his young brain allowed him to do so quickly. As his few days passed, he grew more comfortable around her, and her demeanor became more inviting to him. On the third day, she stayed with him, which he was fine with. He was glad whenever she came with more creamed corn. He didn't know she'd be happy he was enjoying this more, the food and her presence. One night, she had brought in his last meal for the day. She hoped to give him a kiss goodnight, but he'd still cower when she came near him. She accepted it anyway. He had already been through enough, and he needed the comfort. He hadn't left the room in the days he had been there, so he had gotten used to the bed, and he found that comfortable, but not his aunt. He wasn't totally comfortable with her yet. She would leave the room quietly as she had, and he would soon fall asleep. He was sleeping quite peacefully for the first time in a few days, which to him felt like an eternity. That was, until he heard the door open. It was quieter than before, and the creaking of the door unsettled him. His aunt would only come in to feed him twice a day. A third time? This late at night? She would let him know, right? Didn't want to turn around, as he heard the paws creeping up behind him. They weren't the kind of inviting shuffling of his aunt. There was something more sneaky about this. He couldn't tell if this was a predator that snuck in after what he experienced. He tucked himself deeper into the covers. He heard the paws stop. The room was still. Jumbo couldn't look. He didn't want to. The paws continued, much to Jumbo's chagrin. They stopped right behind him. Jumbo could feel the panic begin to come back to him, the sheer mortal panic that he felt those days before. A paw grabbed the covers and slowly unfurled them, exposing Jumbo. That was the final straw. Jumbo squealed, and in the same instant, instinctually lifted his tail and sprayed something out from his bottom. Whatever pulled his covers back withdrew and coughed vigorously. His aunt and another raccoon were in the room in seconds. What hit them first, before they even turned on the lights, was the smell. Reminiscent of rotten eggs combined with burnt rubber, it was putrid. The lights were turned on. Jumbo was in a tearful panic as he cowered in the corner of the bed. A smaller raccoon was wiping his eyes and still coughing. His cousin, whom he hadn't met. An older raccoon, his uncle, whom he hadn't met, was covering his nose and seeing if his son was okay. His aunt, also covering her nose, wasn't standing for it with her son. She scolded him for being out of bed and for coming into the room when he wasn't supposed to. She told her husband to get the tomato juice and start bathing him. He did as she told him and took their son out. His aunt turned to him, her demeanor changing instantly from stern to affectionate. She sat at the edge of his bed, shifting her weight like she always did to make him more relaxed. She looked at him with gentle eyes, eyes that reminded him of his mother. It was the most gratifying sight to Jumbo, and it broke his guard. He scuttled forward from his corner and, in his weeping, without caring about the pain in his shoulder, he threw himself into his aunt's arms. Even more gratifying was his aunt's immediate acceptance of him, and her tight hug in return. In the same gentle tone as before, she said to him, "You're gonna need a bath. You want me to give you one tomorrow?" Jumbo was quick to nod his head as he continued to cry. It was fulfilling to have his aunt comforting him, but Jumbo didn't feel complete. He woke up the next morning with a weight off his chest. The cry he had last night was relieving, and his aunt couldn't have helped him more. He was curious about what a bath in this place would be like. If it were with his aunt, he wouldn't have to worry, but he was still accustomed to the method his mother used on him, licking the dirt off him. But his mother wasn't here. The door opened, and his aunt walked in. The stench from last night was still in the air, but she didn't mind it. She picked up Jumbo as gently as she could and carried him out of the bedroom. Jumbo was curious what this place was like outside of that room. The bedroom he was in, the guest room as it turned out to be, was at the end of the hallway. The hallway led out into the living room, kitchen, and dining area. This was all new to Jumbo as he looked around at his aunt's arms. She was carrying him to the kitchen, to the sink. The sink was filled with water, and a bar of soap was next to it. The sink was rather large for a home kitchen. It would fit Jumbo just fine. If he were in his aunt's arms, he had a feeling he would be okay. She had to remove the bandage from his shoulder. The gash needed to be cleaned. The removal stung, but Jumbo was used to it. The gash on his shoulder was still clotting. His aunt gently set him down on the water. It was warm, and it felt nice. His aunt was careful with him as she gently started lathering him with the soap. Her gentle grasp, along with the frothy soap, brought Jumbo more comfort. The two even discovered he was ticklish on his belly. His aunt, discovering this, started being playful with him. As she washed his front, she would sneak in a tickle on his belly. Every time it made Jumbo giggle. He wouldn't realize how gratifying it was to his aunt to see him in this state. But he found this comforting. He was enjoying it. And above all, he felt safe. Jumbo hadn't felt this sense of security before. Jumbo hadn't noticed the water either. It was brown from all the dirt. He had gotten so used to being matted in the forest that he didn't realize the weight of all the dirt on him. He was starting to feel lighter, and his fur was softer. This bath was a half-hour-long activity. It felt longer to Jumbo, but he didn't mind. Later, his aunt had wrapped him in a towel to dry off. She had him on top of her, with her arms wrapped around him as she lay down on the couch. Not only was her embrace soft, but she was also petting him on the head with her soft paws, interchanging that with scritches. Jumbo wished this security could last forever. She was warm, both in her fur and her heart. But there was still an emptiness in him. He didn't know what it was. The front door opened, and in walked his cousin and uncle with groceries. His uncle commented, "Oh, has he finally gotten washed? Good." Jumbo didn't know what it was, but the tone of his uncle's voice seemed off, like he wasn't exactly happy for him. His cousin wasn't content with him either. At least with him, however, Jumbo could blatantly see it. He had a look of disdain in his eyes that Jumbo could sense. Jumbo could only look back at him with a confused, innocent expression. His cousin's disdain only grew more sour. He scoffed and walked off to his room. Jumbo was left saddened. He didn't understand. Was his cousin still mad at him for spraying him? Jumbo couldn't help it. He was scared. The spraying had just come naturally, and his cousin wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. His cousin eventually had to forgive him. He had to love him. A kiss from his aunt brought him back down to reality. "Don't worry about him, sweetheart," she said to him with love. "He'll come around." Jumbo smiled at her, but one question rang through his mind. When? The emptiness he was feeling was starting to expand, little by little, but he kept enjoying his aunt's affection. Later, Jumbo would eat dinner with the family, which he had become a new member of. His aunt would sit next to him, his cousin across from him, and his uncle across from his aunt. There were cut-up pieces of meat for him, and only him. The other raccoons were eating greens along with their cream corn. If there were one thing his aunt and uncle didn't have to worry about with Jumbo, he would eat. He liked the food his aunt cooked. He liked the steak that she had cooked for him. He liked the texture and how easy it was to bite into. He continued to like the cream corn especially. The sweet flavor and the buttery texture were so delectable. He wouldn't realize how gratifying this was to her, because his cousin wasn't fond of the cream corn. And because Jumbo was, he stared at him with the same disdain as before. Jumbo would sense this and feel the same confusion as before. His aunt told his cousin to stop staring and eat his food. His cousin told her he wasn't hungry. His uncle told him to eat his corn. His cousin said he didn't like it. Jumbo asked, "Can I have your cream corn?" His cousin immediately backed the plate away from Jumbo and grimaced. His aunt immediately scolded him for his attitude and said that if he didn't like it, he should give it to Jumbo so that it wouldn't go to waste. His cousin argued, "Why? He's an animal!" That broke Jumbo's heart. He knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't welcome. He didn't have the appetite anymore, and he felt the tears start to well. His aunt told his cousin, in the lowest of voices, to go to his room. His cousin protested, but his aunt told his uncle to take him. His uncle did so, and his cousin was left grumpy. And just as before, his aunt's demeanor switched on a dime. She was doting on Jumbo instantly. "You want the rest of his cream corn?" Jumbo nodded, and she poured the rest of his cousin's corn on his plate. Jumbo ate it, but not with the same appetite. As decent a husband as Jumbo's uncle was, he'd find out he wasn't the best parent or person to others, and Jumbo's cousin would be cold and distant for the years that he first spent with him. But this was only the beginning. The years passed, and Jumbo would live with his collateral raccoon family, and he still wouldn't know what happened to his mother. The emptiness was still there, and it was only expanding. His introduction to school was smoother than anticipated, much to the delight of his aunt. His relationship with his cousin was still strained, much to the chagrin of Jumbo. Elementary school went fine for him. He received stares because of the scar on his shoulder, but everyone eventually grew accustomed to it.
Can we all pause?
His cousin would be annoyed that he had to be alongside him, and there was further embarrassment for him when Jumbo would ask, and keep asking, to hold pause with him.
Why not? Because
Every time he would reject Jumbo,
I don't want to.
yet Jumbo would keep trying, until he didn't anymore.
Okay.
Then he couldn't. His cousin was 2 grades above him, and was in middle school before Jumbo finished elementary. The emptiness was starting to become prevalent to Jumbo by the time elementary school was ending. Middle school was where things started to become arduous for Jumbo, but harassment would begin with him at the hands of other students. In 6th grade, it was mild, nothing worth writing home about, as it consisted of jesting, teasing, and occasional flicks. 7th grade, his cousin had started high school, and Jumbo's interest would begin to take effect on him. Jumbo had been developing an interest in the arts, particularly in acting. He couldn't explain why, but he found it satisfying. This interest had rooted in 6th grade, but by 7th grade it was blooming. The harassment would also develop and begin taking its own effects. There was one particular individual in his grade, a Rottweiler, who would insult his hybrid breed and tell him he stinks. He would give Jumbo the nickname Mambo, a mix of his name and mongrel. Jumbo knew this behavior towards him too well, but he knew his cousin wouldn't act like this. Even though the two barely spoke, his cousin had grown up, and he wouldn't. Somehow, it still hurt. This Rottweiler would laugh or insult Jumbo at any chance he got. At the awards assembly, in class, anytime, anywhere. This would only make him feel less and less, as his anger would build and build. What made it worse was that every time he came home and his aunt would ask him how his day was, Jumbo would only respond with, "It was fine," and that would be the end of it. He wouldn't realize how painful this was to his aunt. How could she possibly think what he was going through was serious? How could that Rottweiler possibly know who he was? He hadn't the faintest idea. The one day that pushed Jumbo over the edge was during recess, when they were playing makeshift volleyball in the courtyard with a big paper ball. The Rottweiler would continue to insult and tease him, which would continue to irritate Jumbo.
Come on, man.
At one point, Jumbo made a failed toss to his teammate for a pass. Everyone would laugh, but it was the Rottweiler's disgusting laugh that pushed him over. He would grab the ball and throw it at the Rottweiler, hoping to hit him. But it was frankly a pathetic throw, and it just went to the ground. This made everyone laugh harder, especially the Rottweiler. Jumbo had been thinking lately about dealing with the Rottweiler, physically speaking, as any emotionally troubled teenager does. And now was his chance. He would make his way back into the classroom, passing the Rottweiler. But just as he passed him, he shuffled back to sneak in a hit. But Jumbo was shut down immediately as soon as the Rottweiler shoved him. He looked back, and his adrenaline skyrocketed as he saw the Rottweiler getting into fighting stance with a look of "I dare you" written on his face. Those few seconds that Jumbo stared at him felt like an eternity, as thoughts raced through his mind, and the protests of the other students, who wouldn't physically intervene, were drowned out. But Jumbo would back down. His adrenaline made his emotions soar as well, and he fled to the bathroom, to the stall. In the stall, Jumbo would feel like he couldn't breathe. His adrenaline wasn't helping him at all. He thought his chest would explode from the pressure. What was worse was the thoughts that were roaring through his head. What could have happened, and how far he could have gone with it, along with what did happen, and how pathetic he looked in front of everyone. It felt like his emptiness was starting to collapse in on him. After a few minutes, the bathroom door opened, and he heard someone calling for him. It was his otter English teacher, the teacher whose class he had recess in. His teacher told him that he needed to go to the office. Jumbo said that he didn't do anything wrong. His teacher told him, "I know, son. Frankly, I should have intervened sooner because it got this far. I'm sorry." Jumbo was slow to come out, but he trusted his teacher. He saw that his teacher had brought him his things, and Jumbo had even more respect for him now than he had before. Jumbo had respect for most of his teachers, and the teachers enjoyed having him in their class. He did well in his academics, and it wasn't that Jumbo was lonely in school. He had friends in school, but he wouldn't talk to anyone else outside. The respect that Jumbo had for his male teachers would transform, as he didn't have his father, and his uncle wasn't the most attentive to him. Jumbo found the male teachers to be paternal figures. His aunt was the clear maternal figure in his life, and the only true parental figure that he had. However, with the female teachers, he had a connection with them. If it was heartening, Jumbo would become attached and have feelings that were deeper. But Jumbo knew it wasn't appropriate, so he repressed it. Was he only using his feelings with them to fill his emptiness? Jumbo and his teacher walked down the hallway, passing the classroom. There was a commotion coming from inside, a commotion involving the Rottweiler and his protests. The administrators were trying to get him to come to the office, but he was adamant about not going. He kept saying that he hadn't done anything. The teacher urged Jumbo to keep going to the office, and he did. Even while walking to the office, Jumbo heard the noise grow worse in the classroom. He sat down outside the guidance counselor's office. He was coming down from the adrenaline and panic, and the heartbreak was starting to take effect. Before it could settle, he heard the noise from the classroom coming from the hallway and getting closer to the office. The administrators had to bring in the Rottweiler by the arm and sit him down.
Sit down!
The meeting with the guidance counselor went smoothly, at least for Jumbo. Jumbo was fortunate to attend a school where harassment was taken seriously, and teachers were responsible for the students' well-being. He did, after all, earn the respect from his teachers, so that was a bonus. He told the guidance counselor, and that was it. Problem solved. What he didn't like, however, was having his aunt called to the school. As much as Jumbo trusted and loved his aunt, surely she'd think this would be dumb. And if he didn't do anything wrong, why did he need to go home? She showed up regardless and was told everything. And Jumbo felt the awful embarrassment of having all this exposed wash over him. He had lied to her about something so trivial. In her loving way, she took no mind of it. As they were walking out of the school to go back home, what happened next nobody could predict. The Rottweiler darted out of the school. The police officer Dobermans were chasing after him. He committed battery against school personnel, assaulted one of the police officers, and was now evading arrest. He didn't want to deal with the responsibility, and he ran away. Jumbo and his aunt were shocked, but there was worse to come. The Rottweiler wasn't looking where he was running, and was running into the busy traffic outside of the school's campus. In the midst of the chaos, Jumbo couldn't even process any of this as everything happened at once. But he did see a pickup truck coming down the road. A feeling of dread hit Jumbo as he had a feeling that he was about to see what he thought he would see. But he didn't see it. Not that it didn't happen, but that he didn't optically witness it. The pickup heading for the Rottweiler was the last thing he saw before his aunt held him to it and covered his eyes. What he heard next was the blunt hit against the hood. The truck screeching to a stop, the cars behind them also braking. The Dobermans calling for medical assistance. The opening and closing of the front doors. The Dobermans telling the principal what just happened. Them going back inside. And then, silence. Jumbo's aunt walked him to her car, guiding him in as she kept telling him not to look. The simple process of leaving the school was now slowed down. As Jumbo had his head down, he heard the sounds of the car humming, one of the Dobermen directing traffic, and his aunt's worried comments. As they made their way home, they passed the ambulance with its sirens blaring, and it produced a thought in their heads that would later become a tragic reality. The Rottweiler didn't survive. Jumbo remembered the horrible thoughts that went through his head as he was in the bathroom, what he wished he could have done to the Rottweiler. He had the thought of grabbing one of the loose bricks from the courtyard's flower bed and smashing the Rottweiler in the face over and over again with it. Jumbo didn't care if he got hit, he just wanted to hurt the Rottweiler. He wished that he hadn't thought of this. It wasn't the thought that he couldn't do it that disturbed him. It was the mere idea that disturbed him. At that moment, Jumbo felt pity for his bullied Rottweiler, which he didn't realize was possible. And he felt sorry for the parents, whom he could surprisingly relate to. What Jumbo also realized was that he would never be able to remember that Rottweiler differently for the rest of his life. Jumbo and his aunt would sit in the living room and couldn't speak because of what happened. They just had to sit in the silence, letting the grim reality wash over them and the shock wash away. After a little while, his aunt would finally speak to him. She asked Jumbo how long the Rottweiler had harassed him. Jumbo told her. She asked if he ever got physical. Jumbo told her. She asked how long he had been feeling like this. Jumbo told her. Each question made him feel like there was a burning in his throat, and each question made it burn more. He felt embarrassed that he was about to cry to his aunt at his age. He was too old for it, right? The front door opened, and Jumbo's cousin walked in. His aunt asked Jumbo if he had any idea why he was harassing him. Jumbo told her. His cousin turned around with a look of guilt on his face. His aunt asked what was wrong. His cousin hesitantly explained that when he was still in middle school, he had mentioned Jumbo's hybrid species to friends he was no longer friends with, and that word had spread. That statement made the burning feeling in Jumbo's throat transfer to his gut. He had never felt this kind of anger before.
You mean you're the reason I've been bullied?
He told his cousin, and Jumbo went on and on, bashing his cousin for thinking it was something worth talking about, blaming him, and wondering why. All the while, his voice became completely guttural, almost animal. It didn't even sound like he was in 7th grade. He hurled curses at his cousin and gave him one shove before heading off to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. He lay down on his bed, and he thought that because he had vented out his anger, he would feel better. Jumbo felt worse. He felt hollowed out, drained. The guilt of what he had just said only made him emptier, and he just lay there for the next hour and a half with a blank mind. After that hour and a half, he got a knock at his door. It was his aunt. She opened the door, careful with her movements. Jumbo watched her as she walked over to the side of his bed. Sitting down, she had a gentle look in her eyes. This was all bringing back those memories, which were figments in Jumbo's mind now, of his first nights in his home. When Jumbo looked at her in the eyes, he felt a pain in his heart, a pain of it trying to break. He didn't understand why she wasn't mad at him, especially after all the things he had said to his cousin and everything that the guidance counselor told her. He averted his eyes instantly. His aunt's tone was gentle, as it always was. "Look at me, sweetheart." Jumbo did, and instantly he felt the tears start to well up, and the burning was back in his throat. "Do you really want to face your problems alone?" Jumbo looked her in the eyes, his heart breaking, and guard being let down. And he understood. How could she not know what he's going through when she probably went through the same thing when she was younger? That understanding, along with the realization that he had been pushing her away all these years, made him crumble. But it was 2 words that broke him. "Come here." She put him in her arms, immediately accepting of him, just like when he was a baby. He hugged her tightly, feeling all the weight come off his chest as he sobbed. She was hugging him tighter, which felt even more pleasing. He felt so stupid for forgetting about her, how gratifying she was. He even told her. She said he didn't need to. Though it wouldn't totally disappear, The year's worth of emptiness built up would dilute. Eighth grade came and went. It wasn't anything special. High school seemed like a daunting period for Jumbo. But once classes started, it wasn't so bad. The idea that high school was a lot more controlled and cutthroat was intimidating to Jumbo, despite his academic prowess. But high school meant variety, in classes, in teachers, in colleagues. There was virtually something different to look forward to with every class that Jumbo attended, in subjects, students, and curriculum. Of course, there were the bad apples. The students who didn't care about their learning and ruined it for everyone by attention-seeking, or the students who cared too much and had their pretensions, which stressed Jumbo out because they wouldn't stop talking, or the classes that no one liked taking because they had to, and because the teacher teaching it wasn't the best, and sometimes all of that would be wrapped into one. But then again, it wouldn't be a true experience if there weren't any. To Jumbo's surprise, high school was quite the breeze. Freshman year would pass, with some hiccups. Jumbo's first semester in history was quite poor grade-wise, but he advanced and came around. Sophomore year passed also. His cousin graduated, but he still didn't talk to him much. He hadn't taken any theater classes, just because he wasn't sure about what high school theater would entail. He wanted to act, but he didn't know if he wanted to do it for a class. He had participated in the local theater group, but he wasn't sure if he would have the motivation to act if it was required of him. That wasn't until junior year when he began to figure out things about himself, such as how he liked conscious solitude, but was always glad to have friends or loved ones close. Jumbo felt that if he didn't take theater, he would regret it later on. It would be the best decision he would make in his high school career. He discovered exactly why he liked acting in the arts through this experience. Jumbo had always characterized himself by having a ritual. Nothing strict or compulsive, but still a consistency in his doings. Acting, having a script, a sense of control, as well as the ability to express himself emotionally, and the sense of involvement, was invigorating to him. There was something else that he realized. He had a liking for dressing in outfits of the opposite gender. He liked skirts, especially long ones, as there was something he found beautiful about them, sensual even. He felt the same way about maid outfits. There was a simplicity to it, an elegance, and the comfort was prime. With the right colors and pattern, he thought it would look great, and he felt great. He couldn't explain why. Maybe his aunt would understand. His passion for acting didn't stop at the theater. He also enjoyed acting in movies, as it was a different style altogether. There was one particular movie that he found absolutely entertaining. Some Like It Hot. What Jumbo loved about Hot was the idea of drag uncovering elements of expression through the characters. It wasn't the drag of the main characters, but how they found affection for the men and women through their dressing as women that Jumbo resonated with. And, of course, because of the film's sexual humor and the raging hormones that a teenager has, of course, Jumbo found the movie hilarious. He would come to terms with the fact that Some Like It Hot was his favorite movie. However, the movies were more accessible to Jumbo on an emotionally and physical level. Theater felt harder to access. He liked theater, but he had always been given the scripts to read. That wasn't to say that Jumbo didn't know about theater. Everybody knew about Shakespeare. They had to read Romeo and Juliet for English class, which, with the popcorn readers, was a nightmare. Maybe it was, again, the fact that it was required of Jumbo to learn about this that made him not a fan of Shakespeare, initially. He had to read The Crucible by Arthur Miller as well, but it didn't compel him, initially. It was a required text after all. But all that changed when Jumbo was introduced to one play, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. It was a difficult play for high schoolers, but Jumbo found the plot interesting. Two guys wait around a tree for someone that may or may not come. The simplicity of that premise intrigued him. He had high expectations, as his theater teacher said it was one of the greatest examples of modern theater. But he read it once and found it frustrating. Why did they not just leave? Why did some random guy who wasn't Godot show up with a leash guy and torture it? Why was there so little in the story? Jumbo didn't get it. He expected something more, something grander? And all he got was two guys waiting for someone who would never arrive. But he decided to reread it. Maybe he didn't get it. And he read it again, and again, and again, and again. And he found it endlessly fascinating. The idea of waiting in a cruel, bleak world, yet goofing around regardless, was entertaining to him. The wordplay of names and words, such as Didi, Gogo, Gotto, and Good Idea, was so enjoyable to hear verbalized. The interactions of the characters, the play's philosophy, prompted him to look deeper into his own life and the little absurd things that surrounded him. Jumbo began to look at his own life through the lens of Gotto. He thought the idea of waiting for someone who may never come was validating, though not fulfilling. Yet that same waiting would be something to look forward to amidst boredom. He found the idea that tragedy and comedy could be one and the same, enthralling, when it was appropriate, in his case. The fact that two guys would become frustrated with each other, yet they needed each other's company to pass the boredom, would also be a point of interest. Jumbo couldn't stop reading it. He could thank his Fox theater teacher for that. His teacher was a gentle, genuine man with energy, confidence in himself, his masculinity, and his students, whom he'd show the appropriate affection to. Jumbo loved this man. He was everything that he remembered of his father and more. The fact that an adult had the same interest, his teacher wouldn't shy away from female dress either, was willing to share them, was shameless about it, and encouraged his students to do the same with their own, was affirming for Jumbo. Jumbo would even have conversations with his theater teacher during lunch about Godot, who would gladly discuss it with Jumbo, who wasn't the only student to do so. He found this man to be a great substitute for his uncle. Although he had grown to accept the fact that his uncle wouldn't return his love, Jumbo still found his theater teacher a great paternal figure, and arguably the most important man in his 17 years of life. He was unwavering in the fact that his aunt was the most important woman in his life, for right now, because the love that she had for him was second to none, for right now. Jumbo and his cousin, that was a situation that was beginning to fall out. After his cousin graduated from high school, he decided to head into the workforce. But he couldn't find a job in the months following his graduation. On top of that, his friends had gone on, leaving him behind, and he had nowhere to go and no one to spend time with who wasn't his family. He found this endlessly miserable and was starting to grow hopeless. One night, Jumbo was doing his homework when, out in the hall, he heard sniffling. It wasn't from his aunt while she watched her TV shows. It was his cousin. Jumbo would continue with his homework, but eavesdrop on his cousin and aunt's conversation. His cousin would talk about how he wouldn't want to look for a job anymore because every one of his interviewers would reject him, how he didn't have a passion, and how he didn't think he would be purposeful in the world. His aunt encouraged him and denied as well. Jumbo finished the problem and slowly walked out of his room. He walked down the hall, hearing his cousin's muted sobbing. It was both a heartbreaking and intimidating feeling. Jumbo could never recall seeing his cousin cry, let alone hearing it. He walked into the living room to see his cousin trembling in his aunt's arms, his head in her shoulder. Although they were never close before, Jumbo was pained to see his cousin like this. He had never seen it, yet here his cousin was, 19, living with his parents, and crying into his mother's shoulder. As she always did, his aunt unashamedly accepted him. Jumbo could very well picture himself in the same position as his cousin. He knew exactly what he was going through emotionally. Jumbo didn't even have to say anything. He walked over, sat down, and hugged his cousin from behind. In mere moments, the sobbing of his cousin turned from muted to emotional. It sounded like a cry of someone who had been holding it in for so long. Jumbo's aunt took one arm off her son's back and put it around Jumbo. She kissed Jumbo on the cheek as a gesture of thanks for his kindness to his cousin. She embraced them both tightly as their group hug closed in. This action led to a deep realization in Jumbo. Receiving love was a great affirming feeling, but giving that love to someone who needed it was almost as affirming. If he had it given to him, he could surely give it back to others. But that could only go so far, right? From then on, however, Jumbo's cousin would come into his room and just hang out as he did his homework. Jumbo was totally fine with it. He liked it, in fact. There was something comforting about it for him and his cousin. Eventually, when he was done with his homework, the two would simply discuss Jumbo's academics, the job search, and other interests of theirs. There was no real beginning or end to it. They talked and talked and talked. They even talked through dinner. They didn't realize how gratifying it would be for Jumbo's aunt to see them finally getting along. The uncle couldn't care less. But they didn't expect less. One Saturday, Jumbo's aunt was out grocery shopping while Jumbo was showing his cousin Some Like It Hot. His cousin found it as hilarious and entertaining as Jumbo did, for different reasons, but sensible ones. As they came to the final line of, well, nobody's perfect, they howled with laughter. This laughter would go on for nearly a minute before the door opened. Jumbo's aunt burst in with tears in her eyes. Jumbo and his cousin's mood quickly changed. They asked if something terrible had happened. She noted that it was the contrary, that it would be something that Jumbo would love to see, that it was a miracle. Yet she told Jumbo to wait. Jumbo wondered what it could be, so he stayed. His cousin was guided out first. He was out there for 5 minutes before Jumbo's aunt came back for him. Jumbo stepped outside. What he saw was a miracle. Couldn't believe it. It wasn't possible. There was only one woman raccoon with whom he was close at the moment. The other wasn't with him right now. His cousin was standing in equal disbelief at who he had just met. But there was something about this raccoon that felt comforting, deeply familiar. She had to be familiar with him because she was eyeing the scar on his shoulder. And the feeling was so intense that Jumbo's heart was racing. He couldn't believe he was seeing who he was seeing. But the first words out of his mouth were, "Mom?" She nodded, tears bursting out, and she walked up to him, holding his face with her paws. He looked into her eyes. They were the gentle, loving eyes of a mother, not a maternal figure, a mother, one who had been thoroughly anxious. In a voice that Jumbo would often remember because of those vivid memories, she said, "I promised you we'd meet again, didn't I?" His racing heart transformed into his heart breaking, and he turned right back into a baby as his lips quivered with his crying eyes. Her immediate warm embrace of him was so gratifying that he didn't care how long it lasted. She was kissing him all over. He was kissing her back. The sheer love that Jumbo and his mother had for each other wasn't going to dwindle anytime soon. The scar on her back from the scratch mark of that dog had healed. She hadn't fully gotten away from the dog. It had bitten her, but the dog was killed before it killed her. She was taken immediately to the hospital where she would wait nearly 3 days for a vaccination. 3 days without vaccination for rabies was the writing of a death sentence. Jumbo's mother had begun to feel the effects and was just saved before it became lethal. Although she had to learn how to function again over the years, one thing remained on her mind. Her baby. She was going to get back to him, even after she had to relearn how to walk, how to drink fluids, and how to live domestically. And she did. She had to be away from Jumbo because the stress would be too much for him to handle. She had to give him to her sister so that he could be raised. Now she was with him. She never wanted to leave him. He didn't want to leave her either. He realized in that moment that the world was an unforgiving place, not in a cruel fashion, nor sadistic, it just was, to him and to others around him. Yet if Jumbo had love given to him and to receive, he could live just fine. And with that, the emptiness in him was filled.